Well, it's come to my attention that the video that I made for 8/1, that is August 1st of 2019, somehow in its transition from my computer to YouTube, got sped up so that nobody could hear except Mickey Mouse type voice, and get nothing out of the particular devotion. So I get a wonderful opportunity to remake the 8/1 video, and we're talking about event 26 out of 36 in AD 28. Jesus' event is covered in Matthew 12 verses 46 through 50, Mark 3 verses 31 through 35, and Luke 8 verses 19 through 21. We have 5 verses in both Matthew and Mark and 3 verses in Luke. When the Holy Spirit impressed Luke to write this, Luke was able to do it in less words. Can you say this in 10 words? Well, interestingly enough, I really would like to remake this anyway. And the reason I would is I want to tell you a true story. It happened some probably 50 years ago in Lake Park, Florida. I arrived at church as a lay person, and noticed that it was for the evening service, that somebody's headlights were on, and there was nobody in the car. So I wrote a note, because the service had already begun, to be passed to the pastor, that someone in the parking lot with a description of the car had their headlights on and would soon have a dead battery. Well, on this particular Sunday night, Stephen Alford was speaking in person, a good friend of our pastor at that time, Gene Henson's, and was speaking in our small little church in Lake Park, Florida. If you know anything about Stephen Alford, you know that he is a very world-renowned speaker and sought-after speaker, and we were blessed to have him there. Certainly it was only because of the friendship that our pastor had with him. Nevertheless, when I got the note slowly passed forward to our pastor, who was sitting on the front row listening to Stephen Alford intently, he looked at the note and then put it in his pocket. And 5 minutes went by and he took no action. 10 minutes went by, he took no action. Stephen Alford could be fairly long-winded if he had something that he really wanted to say, and in 30 or 40 minutes, the pastor had still done nothing with the note that was passed forward, and I was all concerned about the person's car having a dead battery when they came out. Nevertheless, I sat there, and I guess probably 45 minutes to an hour went by, and our pastor said nothing at all about the person's headlights being on. When Stephen Alford had completely finished, the invitation given, and any announcements made, finally the pastor took the piece of paper from his pocket and said, such and such a car has its headlights on in the parking lot. And I thought to myself, how inconsiderate. Well, you know, it really wasn't inconsiderate at all. Think about Mary and Martha, and who had the sense to realize that the real value was sitting at Jesus' feet. And our pastor very wisely had not allowed my note of an automobile with its headlights on to distract from teachings that we would probably never have normally gotten from Stephen Alford, and was not going to allow the spiritual richness of the meeting to be interrupted by a mundane thing such as headlights. After all, there was probably 20 people in the parking lot that had jumper cables, and certainly a dead battery wasn't the end of the world. But interrupting God's message was very important, to not interrupt his message. Well, that's the kind of story we find here in Matthew 12, verses 46 through 50. And if I were to title a message that I would teach on this, I would certainly use my example and even more wordy version of the Stephen Alford Conference. Nevertheless, when Jesus' mother and brothers showed up on a scene when he was teaching a multitude of people, somebody interrupted Jesus and said, "Your mother and your brothers want to talk to you. They're looking for you." And Jesus said, "Who are my mother and brothers?" Lifted his arm and pointed out at the multitude of people that were listening to him. And he said, "These are my mother and brothers, the ones who listen, who hear, and who obey the will of God." At what price? Obedience. And who does God really get pleased with? Those that get worried about headlights burning in a parking lot, or those that do the will of the Father? It brought a lot of perspective to my life to be able to reflect back on that story when I heard about Mary and Martha, and I was a little older Christian. And then even more to me as I went back through and looked to see what I needed to do to remake the 8-1 video about who is Jesus' mother and brothers. It's those that do the will of the Father. Those who understand those things that are really important versus those things that are just urgent. A very wise pastor, I think the same pastor that was the pastor of this little church in Lake Park, said, "Everything is urgent, but not everything is important." Let's try to remember that as we live out the rest of our lives. Everything's urgent, but not everything's important. Let's focus on being pleasing to God and doing His will. That's my thought for the day. I hope I get more people to watch this video this time than obviously watched it the first time, because nobody contacted me to say it wasn't playing properly.